Today, I'd like to welcome Chris Roberts as our guest. Chris, how are you doing?
Good, thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Glad to have you. Why don't you just give the quick introduction of your exploits in security?
They are lengthy, they are numerous. Half of them, unfortunately, are up on Google,
Right.
which is both good and lessons to others, let's face it. And I've been creeping around this industry, I guess, as a tech, as a researcher, as a hacker, and various other things for more years than I care to think of. So, yeah, it's probably the best summary.
I read or I heard somewhere that you were doing this when you were just a kid in the 80s, right?
Oh yeah, I go a long way back in this industry. I go back to when I don't go quite back to like the early punch cardy mainframe shenanigans.
Right.
The first system I ever messed around with was a ZX80 with a whole 4K of memory, and
Nice.
So the first systems that were ever confiscated were like a Commodore 64 and one of the Atari systems. So yeah, long way back.
We've come a long way, right? The theme of the podcast that we're trying to get our arms around is this idea of what does the C-suite need to do, and what does the C-suite need? How does the C-suite reimagine how technology is going to be managed in the future? One of the interesting stats I read was that 90% of CIOs, and this was a survey, but I think it was 500 CIOs, but 90% of them came out of a coding background, right? Which is a very specific type of personality, right? It's a DIY. I can get her done. Give me a problem, I'll solve it. If somebody needs to come in over the weekend and reboot the servers, I can do that, right?
Yeah.
And the challenge is that their storytelling skills aren't necessarily, right? You get what I'm saying?
So, totally, yeah.
So let's explore that a little bit. And what are your thoughts? How do you get the rest of the C-suite to develop the kind of situational awareness?
I think it's got to be, you're right. Unfortunately, it's like coding or technical backgrounds which don't lend themselves very well to a more strategic conversation, to a more long-term business conversation. We're really good at going in there, and exactly to your point, good at going in and going, hey, we figured out this widget and it's really cool, and blah, 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 blah. And at which point the other leadership are like, yeah, it just doesn't work. And so unfortunately or fortunately, we have spent so many years trying to do it that way, and we know what the results are. That it's not pretty out there. And I think a lot of folks are now realizing, we don't need everybody on the technology to go get a degree in business or business economics, but we almost need a boot camp. I don't just need to go to a CISSP boot camp. I need to go to a business boot camp, I don't need to go get my GIAC or my SANS. I need a SANS business version for us.
Right.
Or I just need to go to a community college, for crying out loud, and actually learn it there, which would probably be a better way of doing it.
Or develop a relationship with the CFO, right?
Or
and get her to explain to you, look, here are the metrics I really care about. Here are the drivers. Here's what I need to justify capital equipment expenditures. And, the importance of those relationships, I think, is sometimes missed. You know what I mean?
Understatement. And again, it's unfortunately, we talked about a little bit offline, it's the silo mentality. And again, the problem is as well, we've done too many years of blame. We've blamed the CFO for not listening to us and giving us money. We've blamed maybe chief marketing, and we still blame chief marketing, let's be honest, for not listening to us.
They're easy targets, right?
I just wish they would. Again, it's back to that collaboration, though. We're doing some amazing stuff with a couple of really, really cool marketing folks where we're listening to what they need. And they obviously got to get the message out there, but now they're listening to how to phrase it. And between the pair of us, like the two groups coming together to, collaborate more effectively, it's amazing the difference. And it is so good. Yeah.
And just getting to know people, right? And understanding where they're coming from and what their perspective is. And really how they're incented, right? And how they incent themselves. Because once you understand that, you understand a lot, right?
There's an amazing Kathy Ullman. She's up at Buffalo, up in upstate New York neck of the woods.
Right on.
She and I talked years ago. We actually gave a couple of talks at a couple of conferences, and it was all about communication. And it was all about taking that very same message, but being able to disseminate it to the user population, being able to take it to middle management who are both justifying what they're doing, sheltering what they're doing, and also trying to grow themselves and give them a similar message, and then take it to leadership on that, I've got 30 seconds in the elevator kind of mentality.
Right.
And it was a really interesting exercise.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I think we need more of that, right? Across IT or whatever we're going to call it. But to go back to the silo, I mean, one of the ideas I want to kind of kick around is this idea of the chief technical concierge, right?
Yeah.
And, we've gotten to a point where, I mean, I talk to a lot of CIOs, CTOs, and there's just too much. I mean, just in security alone, right? It's crazy how much you have to keep up with. I don't think that CEOs in particular understand both the breadth and the depth of knowledge that's needed at a technical level across the entire business, right? From supply chain to, delivering a product. Right.
But here's my argument. They don't have to understand. They're paying you $250,000 a year or more, plus goodness knows what else. You better be able to understand it, and you better be able to come to me and help me understand it in my 30 seconds I've got between the 20 other meetings I'm doing today.
Right. So elaborate on that a little bit.
So think about it from a CEO standpoint. A CEO has to balance everything: financial risk, third-party risk, marketing risk, manufacturing risk, what the hell Mother Nature's doing risk, and everything else. And then technology, in theory, that's just the enabler. Look, all of these new things that come out with newfangled tech just make it work. That's been the mentality. And in essence, our job is to go, hey, I can do that. Here's the risks. Here's what's going on. Here's this. And and in essence, unfortunately, we've gone in there. We haven't spoken the language. We've often gone in alone. To your earlier point, we haven't gone in with the CFO and said, hey, we sat down and realized, we haven't gone in with chief legal or chief compliance to go, we've sat down and talked about risk.
Right.
And all of these, we've gone in on our own, unfortunately. And I'm like, well, the CFO's not giving us enough money. And the CEO's like, not my problem, little buddy. I'm paying you too much money. Go figure this out. And we haven't.
Right. Right. I think that's, I think this idea of building the internal coalition, right?
Yeah.
Who then can go to the board or the CEO or whomever it is and say, look, we've vetted this. We've run the numbers, whether it's legal saying, here's our exposure. I find that, I mean, all of us, I think human beings are not necessarily good at risk management, right? Right. I mean, we're just
terrible.
Right.
I mean, if we were, we
wouldn't drive.
Well, we wouldn't drive. We wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. But then there's a risk of staying in bed. We wouldn't do what we do to the planet. We wouldn't do what we do to each other. We wouldn't. I mean, there's so many things that if we just thought about it for more than the 5 seconds before we do it, we absolutely wouldn't do it. I mean, and that's in the human world where the consequences are immediate. We kind of understand them. You're either alive or dead. I mean,
it's a pretty short feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly. But in the digital world, we don't have that. That feedback loop, at least at the moment, isn't that short. The repercussions, unfortunately, often take an extended amount of time, and then they're just a very different way of dealing with it.
Right. Well, and when it comes to security, the repercussions can be forever if you're not getting rid of your old data, and right. I mean, which is another big issue, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's not even. I mean, knowing where it is probably the first issue. That you're like, oh, we've got data, and some of it's in the cloud, and some of it's here. And I mean, I don't know a single company that knows where its assets are. Which, if you think about it, that's pretty depressing. There's no one decent-sized or half-decent-sized organization that can put its hand on its heart and go, I know where all my assets are.
Which is crazy, right?
How do I come to you and I go, I can protect you, I can look after you if I don't even know what I have?
We should start putting RFID tags on everything,
Yeah,
on all the laptops, and well, at least the stuff people can come in and out of and switch in
but
and out.
even if we do that, what about these things? This is my personal phone, but hang on, I use company email on it, and well, my fridge is hooked up to the system, and
oh, for sure, yeah.
And at that point, where's the barrier? Where's the line? Where's that delineation? Or do we just accept the fact that it is everywhere and we work accordingly?
All right, so from a security standpoint, let's assume that for the foreseeable future, that's the state of things, right? So given the fact that people are willing then to accept a certain amount of risk,
yes,
in exchange for not becoming, a totalitarian company or more or whatever, but you get the point.
yeah.
So now what do I do? I mean, what's my plan B? So plan A's gone, right?
Yeah.
It's out with, it's like AI.
Well, so let's use the car analogy. The car analogy is a fantastic one because we want to accept the fact that, Tom, you and I want to catch up for a drink one day, so one of us is going to have to drive to the other one.
Right.
Okay, that's really, really risky thing to do. But you know what? I can mitigate that risk by maybe getting in a car that has ABS, by maybe getting in a car that's got good tires, that has a tire pressure monitoring system, maybe a car that's got airbags or a couple of airbags, and maybe I'm getting into a car that has a level of autonomy so that when I'm snoozing in the middle of, I'm going across Nebraska at 120,
right, yeah.
all of a sudden I'm like, I have 4 hours. Okay, I got to, it says, hey, Muppet, A, either wake up or I got lane correction for you.
Right.
I mitigate my risks. I know I'm going to do something, but I put my risk controls in place. And it's the same thing in our industry. You and I have to work together. We have to share data. We do business together. But that doesn't mean I go into it headlong and hope for the best. I'm like, hey, Tom, as we're exchanging documents, let's actually exchange them in an encrypted manner. Let's use, when we're having to talk about sensitive data, how about you and I talk on Signal? When maybe I'm sending you information, how do I make sure that how do I help you? Hey, Tom, is your antivirus in good shape? Are you running heuristics? Are you running this? And we help each other by basically lowering that risk. It's never going to go away, which is why we have other things that keep an eye on stuff for us. But at least we can bring that risk level down. So in theory, in the real world, I turn up and we sit down and have a good drink or something. And in the digital world, business is successful and off we go from there.
Right. It seems to me, given the fact that you've got all these endpoints and that employees, and not nefarious employees, just human beings, are probably your biggest risk. Doesn't it become almost a cultural issue within a company, within an organization? It seems to me that just like everything else, right? Your kids pay attention to what you do, not what you say, right? Yeah. And it's the same in a company. Senior management can talk all they want, and the employees, if they're not walking the talk, the employees see right through that. So how do we then it gets back to, how do we get the CEO, the C-suite, to understand that this needs to be something that permeates the culture? Like, we all have a responsibility to each other, right? To build as tight a web as we can. And a lot of it's pretty simple stuff. It's just mindfulness, right?
It's the human. So it's not throwing more technology at the program. It's not saying, you're right, humans are a risk. Well, then let's change that. Now let's turn them into our biggest asset. Because as security, I can't have eyes everywhere all the time. And I can't monitor it all the time, no matter what anybody says we can do. So why don't I turn those risks into my resources, and I effectively train them, I effectively work with them, I continually help them. I give them assets that they can use not just in the office, but they can take home and help their kids understand about these things online. that they can basically help their parents, their grandparents, their family. If they're on a farm, that they can go talk to the hands out there and say, hey, what do you think about this? Hey,
Right.
we're doing this. Why? So you enable somebody to go from a risk to basically becoming an asset and an advocate for, and you do it in such a positive way. Everybody's going to get hit with spam. Well, rather than reprimanding you, when you turn and say, hey, look, I just got this. Oh, you're awesome. Hey, here's a coffee card for Dutch Brothers, or here's a coffee card for, whatever the coffee place is in whatever state they're in. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Even if you get 100 of them, you know what? Those freaking 100 coffee cards are a hell of a lot cheaper than dealing an incident response.
And I mean, it's the best way to incent people, right? Immediate incentives that are small are better than few incentives that are big. And it's a, it's kind of basic behavioral modification, but it works, right? If I get rewarded for doing good things, then I'll do more of those. So any thoughts, any magic pixie dust you've got on how you get the CEOs and the board, if there's a board of directors, to be shaken out of their ennui and start paying attention to this stuff?
Without the use of tasers, force, or
blowing up an anvil.
Oh, don't tempt me. Do not tempt me. I swear. Yeah. I mean, there's so much fun doing that stuff. So much fun doing that.
Yeah.
Although the price of bloody black powder at the moment, I tell you, it gets bloody expensive to blow anvils up.
Well, the price of everything, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah, tell me about it. I'm like, holy smoke. It might be easier to get hold of flicking C4 at this point. Not that
you better stop there, because I think I'm already on some kind of watch list, I'm sure. So
on another one.
You were on a few, yeah, I guess.
Oh, bless. No, it's so, it's tough because you've got a couple of different approaches. You can obviously always go, we talked about behavior modification. One thing we're good at in the technology world, for good or for bad, is social engineering and human engineering. So if I learn, this comes back to communication collaboration. If I learn, Tom, you're the CEO of the organization, let's say your communication style is a relaxed one and a civilized one, then maybe let's engage in a talk. Let me listen to you. Let me listen to maybe some issues and challenges you have, and inject in there the idea that maybe process is a good thing, that maybe technology is good here, that maybe thinking about this one. You start weaving in those stories. Maybe if you're a numbers person and you want root numbers, I just walk into you and we go like, hey, let me explain to you what happened with the company just down the road or the state across the road. Let me talk to you about exactly what's happened and how much money every single other company in our vertical market just lost in the last 48 months. Let me explain to you what it's going to cost you when we don't do this. And then let me give you some options. You enable the CEOs needs to make decisions. So you enable them. You don't just walk in and go, it's a problem and we're never going to fix it. You walk in and go, hey, look, it ain't pretty. Our risk is here. Fiduciary wise, we need our risk here. Here are 3 options. This is the one I recommend, and this is why. Would you like to have a discussion, or are you okay with me running it?
And so a couple things. One is, I think that the listening, which, I personally have to remind myself to do a lot of times, but like, that's just so important, right? Sitting down and listening to your peers, your customers, whoever it is, before you start giving them a solution is so important, right? It's just so critical. The other thing is, though, is how do we assign realistic probabilities to these risks, right? So, I mean, say it's everything from an employee responding to a phishing attack to a state actor, right?
So there's ways of doing that. There's actually some really, really cool stuff out there now that helps you. And what it does, it takes a couple of different metrics. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday about this on a call. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. You blend knowledge of the company. So exactly to what you said. I don't go in there and tell you, I can solve your problems. I can tell you this without shutting the hell up and using these first.
Right.
If I use these and I understand the market you're in, I understand the geopolitical, or I understand all that. When I know, let's say you're shipping widgets. So you're shipping widgets somewhere, which means you've got supply chain inbound and supply chain outbound. I can assume basic risks off of either of those fairly easily. Then I look at you and go, okay, you've got human capital, machine capital, financial capital, whatever else. I can put those and I can go, okay, very quickly I can go, and here is your security program. Here are the people, here is the process, here's the tech. I now know just the overarching risk. That's easy. That's literally a couple of hours worth of conversation. It's no more than that. And I don't care how big or how small the company is. Now, let's talk about risk appetite. What do you care about? What do you not care about? And now I can also start putting some numbers by it. And there's some really good stuff out there that says, hey, it's basically taking intelligence. So we call it threat intelligence, we call it cyber threat, we call it all these things, but it's intelligence. And it's going, here's what we've seen in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Here's what we've seen in the last 12 months. In your specific markets, because you've just told me all this, I see a financial risk here, I see these risks, and you can quantify that really, really, really well.
Fascinating.
It doesn't take, we overcomplicate things, unfortunately. And this is why, I mean, we use a spreadsheet. I got a blasted spreadsheet that within literally a couple of hours, I'll tell you where your risks are. And they might be very different than where you thought they are, but I'll tell you, we'll sit down, we'll have a nice talk. I'll talk to a couple of other folks and I'll observe, I'll watch. Now I'll tell you where your risks are. And now we can have that conversation and go, you know, let's go to your point, state actor versus something else. Let's say you have data, it's not managed, but if you lose it, it doesn't matter. And that's a simple conversation. Hey,
right. Yeah.
Let me
yeah,
take.
Don't worry about this.
Yeah, let me take this bit of data. Hey, if I go stand on the street corner in the middle of New York City and I yell exactly what's on here, are you going to be concerned, or are you going to be like, that's an easy conversation. Now I know the risk of the data. Now I know where it is. So the data's sitting on an unpatched server 2008 that's got remote desktop protocol to the internet. High risk.
Yeah. Right.
Probably has already been breached, but we don't know about it.
Right. High probability.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, and how easy is it versus how likelihood? These are all easy things to quantify. And you do that a couple of different times. Again, a couple more hours and you're done. This doesn't take months and months of work to do.
There you go.
It really doesn't. Or you use something like the NIST, the cybersecurity framework, or something like that to just put the ticks in the box and go, we're good, we're bad, we're ugly, we're good, we're bad, we're ugly. And you can do that yourself. You don't have to spend thousands or tens of thousands to do it.
I guess a lot of people just need someone to help them break it down.
Yeah.
The way you've broken it down, right? Yeah. And not overcomplicate it, which is another human thing, right? Like, give me something simple and I'll make it as complex as I possibly can.
Why you so perfect example. Let's talk about acceptable use. So data. Again, we talked about data. We break data down so complexly, it's not even funny.
Right. Yeah.
But all you got to do is you just say, okay, you've got a choice of one of 4 squares. Where do you want to put this data? Can I yell on the street corner? Do I have to keep it on top of my desk? Do I have to put it in a desk drawer? Or does it have to be locked up in a safe where nobody's got the password? Pick one of those to put the data. Now I know exactly what my risks are. That ain't that hard to do.
If you've got that framework.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And even if you don't, again, it's taking something that is fairly complicated and putting it in a perspective that the CEO or the C-suite can readily understand. Well, I take that home with me. All right. Well, what happens if I steal it?
Right.
Oh, shit, that's got the financial data on it. Okay. Let's put it in a locked briefcase.
And the C-suite is one of your biggest threats in terms of employees, right? They got access to stuff. They didn't even know what they have access to or what their passwords are. What was a funny story you told about somebody keeping a password?
Oh my gosh. We did a, I haven't had it in a long time, but we were out in one of the neighboring states to Colorado. We were out there doing an assessment and we found the passwords on the thing. I turned the keyboard over and I found a password on the keyboard and I just curled up.
So classic, man. That's classic. That's awesome.
But we haven't educated people well enough to go, you probably, because again, we're humans, we like to help. And especially, this is all about flyover. We have the Midwest states.
Right.
And almost with few exceptions, everybody wants to be nice and freaking help. I've had the best bloody times there. You
Absolutely.
all want to be nice to people. Nobody's being mean, and why would somebody come after me? Well, that's the mentality we've got to change.
Exactly. I don't need to lock my door.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's safe. All right. Let's take this idea of security and intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
right, and talk about some of the things that you've been able to do to save companies money from leakage, spoilage, theft. In other words, there's some security things that actually have an upside, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating, how you do some of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a number of it. The intelligence stuff is actually a kind of a cool one because first and foremost, I mean, for the stuff we're doing inside like a HillBilly Hit Squad and the Dave product, I mean, we're building it into the Dave product. The idea is again, you look at your data and you go, what do I care about? What happens if this gets out? Well, now let's monitor it. Let's track it. Let's see if anything outside of your control is leaking it or has leaked it. Let's see if anybody that has access to it has themselves unfortunately been compromised. So it's a really nice way of sitting down with a company and going, hey, let me just sniff around the internet, the good stuff and the darker side of the internet, and let's see what our starting version is. So we've gone out a number of times and done that and come back and said, hey, look, we've seen that these people with these accounts, and by the way, here's all their passwords, have been breached out of this. What are you doing? How did you know? Did you know? So it's a really nice way of saying, hey, look, it turns information, into something that's actionable and usable intelligence. And you put it in such a way that, again, the organization can take that and go, okay, great. Now we know what we can do with it. Now we know we can restrict. Now we know we can manage. Now we know where we have a risk. Because again, you might be sitting there. You're sitting there. You're the CEO of the organization. You think that you've got a risk maybe on the physical side. You want to put better locks on the doors. You want to put bear traps on the front steps, and you want to have 6 Doberman pinchers that are starving hungry in your office every 5 minutes.
Right.
But what you forgot about, or maybe you didn't realize, is that because you're in your office and you can't get out because of the damn Dobermans, you had wireless installed. And because you're the C-suite, you didn't want to put a decent password. So the wireless password is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 exclamation mark. And somebody wardrobe it as they drove by 600 yards away, and it's sitting on a map on the public internet. You're never going to know that unless you've looked outside of your perimeter, unless you've had somebody with intelligence go, hey, all this is totally cool, but you're focusing in the wrong area. You need to be focusing over here. So that's really a lot of what it helps you do.
And haven't you been able to use intelligence, and especially when you're talking about tracking things, to help companies figure out, so let's say I'm losing inventory.
Yeah.
Right. And every month, I got $100,000 of inventory that I can't account for.
Yeah.
And, so that's, $1 million plus a year.
Yeah. We did it. My gosh, we did it with a couple of retailers. Again, nice, good, big old Midwest retailers. And I mean, they were suffering. I mean, they were hundreds of millions a year that they were having. They call it slippage. And we reduced that. Yeah.
I call 100 million a fall, but
you and I both. I'm
right.
like,
right.
No, that was just cost of doing business. I'm like, no, I don't accept that. Let me tackle this problem. And we tackled it, and we dropped their losses down quite considerably. It was actually cool to do because we basically, again, we looked at the process. We looked at the supply chain. We went, where does it start and where should it end up? Now let's look at every single piece along there. And we looked at everything we could. Then we took a step back and looked at all the external intelligence, threat intelligence. We looked on the darker side of the internet to see if anybody was buying or selling or trading. We looked on the more open internet to see what was going on. And we started to piece together a couple of groups that had some pretty fantastic tactics. Then we looked at the shipping and the containers on the shipping. And that's why there's a company out of Australia I'm helping develop better shipping container tracking systems. And all of this stuff. And we just broke it down. It's a problem. So you break the problem down into manageable chunks. And then you go, what do I know? What am I missing? And can I fill any of those missing blanks in with all the external intelligence? And then you're like, okay, now let's change our tactics, and all of a sudden more product turns up.
Interesting. And I'll bet that's way more common than people realize.
Oh, I mean, it frustrates me to no end when somebody says, well, that's just the cost of doing business. And I'm like, it isn't. Let me help you. I'll take the challenge. And I've done it a couple of times. We've done it almost on a pro bono thing. I've done a bunch of it in the watch industry. Similar kind of concept. There are some very, very nice high-end watches that they want to maintain and protect their brand. They do a lot of it in-house, but some of it goes out-house. And it's been interesting to basically map out their process and the people and go, well, you have a problem here. There was an infamous one, which is during the day, the factory basically made the components for the watch company, and literally the night shift made the same components for the black market.
No.
Same templates, and these guys were paying for both. I mean, and we're like, let's have that. And in that case, we ended up breaking into we broke into the cameras and surveillance systems, and
really?
we handed them the footage, and they were like, "You could." There was this.
No, because those guys go to great lengths to control that kind of stuff. Theoretically, right?
Yeah, should go to great lengths. But again, this is part of the problem. It's you go to as many lengths as you can, but if you're making something, you've typically got a list of suppliers where you have to take some of that stuff on trust. I have to trust that your factory is doing what it needs for me, and that's all it's doing. And I can't always send an inspector out. We run into the same place with child labor. We have so much of that we get dragged into on other things that you take it on trust, and then eventually you get to send somebody out there. And if they know you're coming, they've hidden everybody, obviously. But if you turn up unexpected with, coffee and donuts, then hopefully you can catch them on what they're doing. But we did it in the digital sense, and we just hit the surveillance cameras.
Well, that's that kind of technology being used for good things.
Exactly. We might have bent a couple of rules and regulations along the way, but the point was well made, and corrective actions ensued. Hi.
Yeah. Well, that's a happy ending. Speaking of happy.
Yeah. It's my buddy.
Yeah. All right. We're nearing the end. A couple of takeaways, and then if you've got some things to add, I guess I would encourage technologists working within organizations to think about breaking down problems into their simplest form. Right? That helps in storytelling, and it also helps you prioritize, right? And know what's important and what's maybe not so important. Listening.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to figure out how people are incented.
Yes.
And how you can help them, right, get more incentive pay.
Yeah.
How can I help you be more successful?
Yeah.
And if it's somebody in the warehouse, they don't necessarily need to be scared of you. You can say, look, man, you got this problem, but we can fix it, and you could be a hero.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So anything else you can think of that pearls of wisdom you want to leave for the
I think you hit it, which is I think there's two things. One would be unfortunately question more, trust less.
That's our state of affairs right now.
It sucks that we have to do that, and unfortunately, especially inside our own industry, if I come to you with my silver bullet of protection and absolute, I can keep all the bad guys at bay, after tasering me and putting it up on YouTube,
that would be
that's where the question more. It's like, you come to me and you tell me you've got AI. Well, I've got a list of 15 questions. If you can get through those 15 questions and you can prove you have actual intelligence rather than just fuzzy programming and some good marketing, then we'll have a conversation. So that's definitely more, it's trust less, question more. But the other one, the other big one is we talk about this whole trifecta: people, process, and technology.
Right.
And we have so focused on technology. We are chasing down all the technology routes that we've totally forgotten other people, and we're kind of doing process as we remember to do it. So step back and realize that we haven't fixed some of the fundamental things. One, because they're hard work. Asset management and inventory actually means you got to roll up your sleeves and count shit.
And nobody wants to do that, right?
No, and it's all about the people. Hell, I'll give 10 people pen and paper and pay them money to go count things. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper than it is to putting, a new piece of tech in. So yeah, use the human element more than we use technology.
That's a really good point and a good way to end it. So thanks so much. And you're right. Don't forget about the human element. It's really critical. It's the secret sauce.
Totally. Absolute
Right
pleasure
on.
being on. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man.